Welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant, where I give my in-depth analysis of all the pay-per-views I watch in the WWE Network. And of course, over the month of July, I'll be reviewing every Great American Bash installment of the WWE from 04 to 05, 06, 07, and 08. The Great American Bash was, of course, a staple in WCW and WCCW for many, many years before this, before becoming a WWE tradition every June and July from 2004 to 2008. Of course, it held one last event in 09. The Bash technically wasn't part of the chronologically of the WWE. The Bash is its own event, so I won't include that. But nevertheless, so today is the Great American Bash 2004 on June 27th, 2004, of course. So that's why I say every June and July, because I think it was in July every month after this. But this one event was the only Great American Bash, I believe, to my memory, that was held in the month of June. But nevertheless, though, kicking off the show was John Cena defending his United States Championship in a fatal four-way contest, as per the decision of the SmackDown general manager of the time, Kurt Angle. Rene Dupree, Booker T, and RVD were the contestants, or were the challengers for the United States Championship in this contest. So Kurt Angle and Cena had a big feud going on at this time, with feud in 02, 04, 05, many times over the course of their WWE careers, so to speak. But nevertheless, though, I really like the idea of defending the U.S. Championship on the Great American Bash show, in which they did, I think, almost every show, every Great American Bash show, from 04 to 08. But even so, though, even back in 2008, they held a fatal four-way contest on the 4th of July on an episode of SmackDown. They called it the Fatal Four-Way for the U.S. Championship or something like that. So I like the concept, I like the idea, the concept behind this contest, to do a four-way matchup for the United States Championship only days before the 4th of July. So I thought that was pretty cool. The matchup itself was a great matchup. I thought it was really nice. It was an elimination-style contest. So I think RVD was the first to go. Then Booker came down to Cena and Dupree, who were already feuding by this point anyway. And Cena ended up picking up the victory and retaining the United States Championship. So I thought this was a very good opener. Cena was still on the rise at this point. Before the contest, he cut a promo on Kurt Angle and all of his opponents in the matchup. And what was a good contest? What was a good promo? The people in the crowd were behind him. I think the show was in West Virginia, correct me if I'm wrong, or Pennsylvania, or somewhere along those lines, somewhere in that part of the country. But the crowd was receptive towards the promo. It was long before Cena had the fans turning against him and saying Cena sucks and all that kind of stuff. That wouldn't come until his WWE title run in 05. So he was still over with the fans. It was his basic thugonomics thing in 04. So that was a good promo. Good matchup. Very good way to go off, to kick off the show. So I enjoyed this opener. But of course, unfortunately, not set the tone for the rest of the night, because the rest of the night was horrendous. And I'll get to that in a minute. But even so, though, this is a great first matchup to open the show with. Up next, in a backstage segment, we had Charlie Haas flirting with, I think it was Tori Wilson or Dawn Marie, I think it was. They had a backstage segment. He was flirting with her, and up comes Kurt Angle in the wheelchair, just saying that we used to be the world's greatest tag team. They've basically fallen off the face of the earth since we broke up a number of years ago. So I'm going to have you prove your worth against my new ally, Luther Reigns, who I guess was the guy that was pushing Angle around in his wheelchair at the time. So that set up that subsequent contest between Luther Reigns and Charlie Haas. The matchup was what it was. It was pretty much a squash match. Charlie Haas, Shelton Benjamin had the brighter future of the two, as we would come to learn. But Charlie Haas was also a very talented athlete, a great collegiate wrestler. So I'm surprised they didn't do more with him during his WWE run. But Luther Reigns, he's one of the first of many guys on this show that WWE tried to shove down our throats as one of the bright, young future stars of the SmackDown brand. In the SmackDown brand, I actually just got finished listening to an interview with Paul Heyman and Edge and Jericho on Jericho's podcast just recently. And they were talking about how SmackDown did have the future faces of the WWE. They created Rey Mysterio, they created Edge, they created a number of young faces in WWE that eventually would go over to Monday Night Raw and become one of the biggest stars in WWE history, Eddie Guerrero included, Chris Benoit. So, and they had that success in 02, 03, not so much in 04 with these guys, Luther Reigns being one of them. I knew him, wasn't all that familiar with his work. He was kind of impressive in the ring, but he didn't really go anywhere after this. I guess he did some stuff at the remainder of 2004, and I apologize for not doing my research. But I do remember the name. I recognize the name. I just haven't seen many of his matches, and this was the first of many, the first of few, I guess, of matches that I would see from him. And it was an impressive outing for what it was from Luther Reigns, but he didn't really blow me away in the ring with his skills against Charlie Haas. So I'm not exactly sure what happened to him. I guess he might have come down with an injury or whatever. I'm not exactly sure. But like I said before, they try to tout him as like the future face of the SmackDown brand, and he got a big push in being allied and being in alliance with Kurt Angle. But it just didn't really go anywhere, unfortunately. So that was basically a squash match. Up next, we had a Cruiserweight Championship matchup between the defending champion Rey Mysterio and Chavo Guerrero. First of all, a couple of things that I was surprised by here. One, the fact that it didn't open the show. Two, that I got nearly 20 minutes of in-ring time. And three, that it had a story behind it, which is pretty rare for the undercard matches, for the Cruiserweights, whatever. The Cruiserweights, when they did have stories in WCW, in WWE it was a bit different, and they would have stories every once in a while, but for the most part, usually they would just throw Cruiserweights together on the SmackDown brand, and Cruiserweights opens on pay-per-views and stuff like that, just to get them all on the show without any real story behind it. And Chavo Guerrero had lost the Cruiserweight Championship to Rey Mysterio a number of months prior, and these two were still engaging in a feud for the remainder of 2004. They were talking about how Chavo had beaten Rey Mysterio or defended the title against Rey Mysterio at the No Way Out pay-per-view. They were the final two entrants in the Cruiserweight Open at WrestleMania 20, which I do remember because I watched WrestleMania 20 a number of months ago, which I reviewed here on the channel, which you can go back and check out. Shameless plug. But I love the fact that they had this feud going for so many months, and that's why it intensified this contest and made it that much more compelling, because it was entertaining action. They had a story behind it. Chavo continued to target Rey Mysterio's knee or shoulder or whatever it was, but there was a story behind the matchup, and that's why I enjoyed it. So I would definitely go as so far as to say that this was the matchup of the night, because it had a story, the action was great, two great workers that had one of the best feuds of the Cruiserweights on the SmackDown brand in WWE history. So definitely a great matchup. Like I said, I was surprised it didn't kick off the show, and it's probably for the better, because it was positioned in a better light in getting nearly 20 minutes of in-ring time. So I thought that was great. So great stuff from Mysterio and Chavo. Mysterio was successful in retaining his Cruiserweight Championship on the show. So a very good contest, and by far the match of the night, in my opinion. Up next, we had Kenzo Suzuki taking on Billy Gunn. Suzuki was another one of those guys. Unlike, there were three guys on the show that they were supposed to be pushing as like the next future faces of the SmackDown brand of the WWE, and that was Luther Reigns, Suzuki, and Mordecai. Mordecai and Luther Reigns. Mordecai I've seen a number of matches from in the past on YouTube and whatever. Reigns not so much, but I knew who he was. Suzuki, I have never heard of this guy before in my life, and I did some research on him because I was really intrigued when he came out for his matchup, and I hadn't heard a damn thing about this guy. I've heard no fans talk about him. I've seen no matches of his in the past. He was exclusive to SmackDown for his entire run, based off what I've read on Wikipedia on his page and whatever. I guess he was drafted to Raw in maybe 2005, but they never did anything with him, and he was released shortly thereafterwards. I think it might have been an injury that derailed his push, but they were pushing this guy down the throats of viewers over the course of 2004, and they did nothing with him. They had him challenge for the U.S. Championship. I don't think he won. I think he had a brief tag team with someone and won the tag team titles with someone on the SmackDown brand, but that was about it. So, and I'm not surprised. This guy was talented, and I'm not saying he could have been world champion material, but I don't know. I guess WWE, not to sound racist or anything like that, but WWE has a tendency to really not push Asian competitors. It's been a weird thing. I've seen a lot of people talk about this, and after seeing the treatment of this guy or reading about it, now I finally believe that is true. With Tajiri, with Yoshitatsu, with Suzuki. Tensai technically wasn't Asian, but he came back with an Asian warrior Lord Tensai gimmick, and they did nothing with the guy. And that's exactly watching this match and watching his entrance and stuff like that. It brought back memories of Tensai, of Lord Tensai from 2012. And I mean, I know this was earlier than that, of course, but I mean, with the manager at ringside, who I guess was his real-life wife, and just the entrance, the elaborate entrance, and the matchup, and the dominating style, stuff like that, it just brought back a lot of memories of Lord Tensai and how that character bombed. And he's still under contract to WWE, but Matt Bloom, I guess, is just doing commentary now as Jason Albert on the on NXT and stuff like that, which is good for him, but the whole Lord Tensai thing was a complete bust, as was this guy. The matchup was okay. They had a story going. I guess they had a match on SmackDown a few days before this where Billy Gunn won via DQ. And Billy Gunn by this point, Jesus Christ, watching this show, I'm like, how the fuck does this guy still have a job in WWE? This guy's past his prime and stuff like that. I mean, it was hard to believe that it was 6 years prior to this. This guy was at the peak of his career in D-Generation X, and I think in '99 he won the King of the Ring tournament. But he was still employed 5 years later doing nothing. And of course, he'd still be wrestling years after this, a part of the as Cute Kip in TNA, and they'd still be doing the New Age Outlaws thing in TNA all those years later. But I was still surprised that he was still in the WWE by 2004. And I mean, he had some impressive moments, but it was like, come on, give it up, dude. I mean, you're like, what, 44 something years old? It was just embarrassing to see him in the ring, and Suzuki was a bust. So this matchup was not fun to watch at all. Not a good match. This Billy Gunn had to retire by this point. To think that he went to TNA after this and had a lengthy run there was mind-boggling to me. And Suzuki went nowhere after this, so pretty inconsequential matchup in the long scheme of things. So not a good matchup in the interim things anyway. So moving on to the next contest, Sable versus Tori Wilson. They had a bit of a feud going on at the time as well. A part of the SmackDown Divas, even though the Divas never had a championship, or the women never had a title on the SmackDown brand, since the women's title was exclusive to Raw at the time. They just had basic feuds, and it forced them to create feuds for the women on SmackDown. And I appreciate that. We don't get much of that nowadays. Now we just get random title changes, and hopefully that changes with Paige and AJ this summer. But even so, at least they had feuds and storylines going for the women in the WWE around this time. And it didn't even have to be over a championship. So, but and the feud was there. The storyline, the reasoning behind this matchup was there. But Tori Wilson was far from a exceptional wrestler in the ring. I mean, she was a sight to see, of course. She was eye candy, but aside from that, I mean, she was not a great wrestler at all. I can see why she didn't have much of a future as an in-ring competitor, and she's one of my favorite divas in the last 10 years or so. But just as an in-ring competitor, you can see why she didn't last long in that department, and this matchup was proof why. Sable was hot in like the late 90s with Mark Marrow, and after she broke up with him, and I learned that all from WWE Countdown on the WWE Network. And I already knew of Sable by this point. I know she's married to Brock Lesnar to this day in real life. But she was another woman like with Billy Gunn that I was surprised that, Jesus, she's still at the company by 2004. And I wouldn't kick her out of bed or anything like that. But I mean, by this point, she's like 40-something years old. Like, give it up. Why are you still there? What are you accomplishing? I mean, like Tori Wilson was on the cover of this pay-per-view. I mean, promoting the whole USA theme. And that was good. I mean, that was probably the best part about the show was the poster with Tori Wilson on it. But this matchup was not good. Like I said, the story was there, but Wilson is not an in-ring competitor. Sable was not good either. She was well past her prime, and it was just not a good matchup. So thankfully it didn't last too long. Even the finish looked terrible with Sable trying to roll up Tori, and the commentators tried to play it up like it was on purpose, and maybe it was, but it just came off tremendously bad. So not a good matchup there either. Mordecai versus Hardcore Holly up next. Mordecai ended up becoming Kevin Thorne, the Vampire in WWE. He might have had another gimmick here and there. I don't really remember. Maybe down in FCW or something, but either way, it was a cool gimmick in essence, and I guess it was supposed to feud with The Undertaker at some point, and it's not hard to see why. I mean, the whole religious aspect of the character, and this would never fly in WWE today, given how PG they are, and even in the world today, given how PC today's society is, this gimmick would never fly in WWE today. But it was a cool character. Like, even looking at him, he's got a cool presence about him. And he was a decent wrestler as Kevin Thorne. I mean, he was given a lot of bad gimmicks. I mean, like I said, Mordecai was badass, but it was never really going to make it past a certain level. Like, you couldn't really see him as a world champion. It's just too goofy. You know what I mean? Like, a feud with The Undertaker is one thing. That's a whole sports entertainment side of wrestling. But to give the guy a title like the World Championship would be a joke. So the gimmick was never going to make it past a certain level. But that being said, though, they had him win a whole bunch of matches. I think he debuted at Judgment Day in that year in 2004. Beat someone there, beat someone on this show, Hardcore Holly. I think he lost to Rey Mysterio a couple of weeks after this, and then he was gone. And they never used him after this. They never used Mordecai. Like I said, the guy who portrayed him ended up becoming Kevin Thorne on ECW a number of years later. And they look nothing like this. If you put the two side by side, you would never know that they're the same person. Like I said, with the Reigns and Haas match and Suzuki Billy Gunn match, another complete squash match in order to establish Mordecai as this new future face of the SmackDown brand. I say that a lot, but the commentator said a lot on this show, Michael Cole and Taz. And none of these guys ended up surfacing as future stars of SmackDown because they all sucked. Reigns was not all that good. Suzuki was a bust. Mordecai was a failed gimmick from the start. And they never even ended up doing the intended purpose of this whole gimmick. It was to feud with The Undertaker, and they never even ended up doing that. So what purpose did it serve in the long scheme of things? So that was really strange. But this matchup, Mordecai ended up attacking Hardcore Holly. I guess Mordecai a couple of days prior on SmackDown cut a promo that he was after anyone that was a sinner, and the commentators speculated that because he attacked Hardcore Holly backstage, that Holly was a sinner. I don't know. I don't really care, to be quite honest with you. The match was just there. Hardcore Holly, I think, is an underappreciated talent in my book, and it was kind of a shame to see him go to complete waste in this matchup and for the rest of his WWE run. But like I said before, a complete squash match for Mordecai and Hardcore Holly. Up next, a Texas Bull Rope match for the WWE Championship between JBL and Eddie Guerrero. These two had a feud going back for a number of months, dating back to Judgment Day. I think JBL won by DQ when Eddie hit him with a chair, or maybe it was vice versa. I can't recall. I think it was JBL who hit Eddie with the chair, whatever. But this was the end of Eddie Guerrero's reign as WWE Champion, as JBL. Well, initially Eddie Guerrero won the matchup as he tagged the referee believed that Eddie Guerrero tagged the fourth turnbuckle, but then a replay showed that it was instead JBL who picked up the victory and was crowned the new WWE Champion. It would mark the start of his near year-long reign as WWE Champion before dropping into John Cena at WrestleMania 21 in 2005, creating his star in the process. I'm not a big fan of strap matches, never have been, probably never will be. I didn't like Sheamus versus Mark Henry. I didn't like CM Punk versus Umaga. I didn't like JTG versus Shad, and all the recent strap matches that come to mind. I just don't like the gimmick. I just think it's dumb, to be quite honest with you. It's not all that exciting. But to the credit of JBL and Eddie Guerrero, they had good chemistry in the ring to the point where they did make it exciting. So props to them for that. They made this one of the better matches of the night. Maybe it wouldn't have stood out on a WrestleMania card or a SummerSlam where there would have been better matches. But with so many shitter matches on the show, with all the crappy squash matches that they had on the show, this matchup stood out as one of the better ones. And it started out slow, but they built up the pace as it went on. The final few minutes were very, very well done, with Eddie Guerrero being portrayed as the babyface. Of course, obviously, as a babyface, but as the underdog, I meant to say. So he played that role to perfection. JBL was dominating for most of the matchup, some cool spots here and there. It served its purpose of entertaining the crowd, creating drama, and giving the championship to JBL. And you would think, because it was such a monumental moment, or as it would turn out to be, that JBL would win the WWE title. And they were trying to push him to the moon at the time, because only a few months prior was he just Bradshaw, a part of the APA, and they broke him away from that. And just months later, he was a WWE champion. You would never think that in a million years at the time that this tag team wrestler in this historic tag team would go on to win the WWE title. Just not even years later, like Bully Ray and TNA, but only months later. So that was crazy to think about. But Eddie Guerrero's reign, I mean, it was a good reign, of course. He had a nice reign as WWE Champion. I think they could have done more with it or had to go on a little longer. I think they could have waited a few more months before putting the championship on JBL. He had good heat at the time, but I think they could have waited, another month or so to continue to build him up to the level of being WWE Champion. I just don't think he was ready yet. But just the whole way this matchup went down with Eddie Guerrero winning and then reversing the decision to say that JBL won, it was kind of a sucky way of doing the title change. So like I said, one of the better matches of the night, but the finish was kind of terrible. The final few minutes were fantastic, but the way the title change came about was just kind of disappointing in my opinion. But that was that, new WWE Champion crowned. And of course in the main event, the infamous Concrete Handicap match, Concrete Crypt Handicap match, I should say, between The Undertaker and Team 3D. Now, I didn't know, I wasn't completely aware of the story going into this matchup, but the video package kind of helped me with that. So the story going into this matchup was that Paul Heyman was feuding with The Undertaker at the time, and after having pumping up Team 3D and lighting a fire under their asses, they kidnapped Paul Bearer, who was still with The Undertaker at the time after he had returned at WrestleMania 20 when Taker went back to the Dead Man gimmick. I reviewed that in my WrestleMania 20 review. You can go back and watch that. Shameless plug once again. But they kidnapped Paul Bearer, once again bringing back terrible memories of when Edge did the same thing in 2010. Not a good feud at all, where Paul Bearer also technically died, but whatever. So, to get back at The Undertaker, they kidnapped Paul Heyman, I'm sorry, that was confusing. Paul Heyman took the urn from Undertaker, And he controlled him. He had control of him. Undertaker was attacking face wrestlers left and right going into the show. Yeah, he was still putting a match against Team 3D, so it was a little weird. And Paul Heyman said for Undertaker to do the right thing by having him lay down for Team 3D, and if he didn't, then he would pull the concrete lever and just pour concrete all over Paul Bearer. That's fucking confusing. Two Pauls. And put the concrete on Paul Bearer, thus drowning him and killing him. So that was the little story behind this matchup. To think that no one would come out to the rescue of Paul Bearer and save him from attempted murder, I have no idea. That's just wrestling for you and just the crappy booking of this feud. The matchup was, I'm not going to say it was horrendous, but it was not a good matchup at all. It was lackluster at best. I wasn't expecting it to be a 5-star classic anyway, but it was a pretty mediocre matchup, especially for a main event of a pay-per-view. I mean, this is 2004. Team 3D in the main event of a WWE pay-per-view in 2004. No, thank you. These guys were well past their prime as a tag team. I mean, they went on to have great matches in TNA. Don't get me wrong. They're a great tag team, still one of my favorite tag teams of all time, and definitely deserving of a WWE induction to the Hall of Fame at some point. But at this point in their careers, they should have been nowhere near the main event scene. And why this matchup main evented over JBL and Eddie, especially where a title change happened, I have no idea. And it's not even like there was a happy ending to this matchup to send the crowd home happy. And I'll get to that in a minute. But Undertaker goes over Team 3D in what was like maybe a 5-10 minute matchup. So why that was the main event over the WWE title match is mind-boggling to me. But that's what it was. So before Paul Heyman can pull down the lever and thus drown Paul Bearer in the concrete, some lightning strikes the tank, the truck, whatever. Paul Heyman scurries out of there. Undertaker comes to the rescue of Paul Bearer, but instead of saving him, he says, "This is the way that it has to be. Rest in peace." And he pulls the lever and thus drowns Paul Bearer. And the way this was all done, I guess they pre-recorded it later or earlier on in the day, with Paul Bearer being drowned in the concrete, and I guess he was actually in the tube or the whatever it was, the crate, and the concrete was pouring in front of him. So it's kind of confusing to even say. It's kind of even confusing me to talk about. But and then the person in the arena live was a stunt double, I guess, to kind of fool fans that he was actually in the crypt. So it's really confusing. I don't know. It was a really dumb concept. And to think that The Undertaker murdered his own father or stepfather, whatever, was a little bit weird and a bit of a dark way to go off the show. So like I said, it wasn't even like it was a happy ending to go off the show. And that's why they put this matchup over the WWE title change with JBL winning. It was a really creepy way of going off the show. Maybe Undertaker justified his actions a couple of days later. And maybe he wanted to prove to Paul Heyman that he wasn't in control of him anymore. So maybe that's the way that it had to be. I don't really know. And WWE never really clarified this. I'm just kind of taking off what I've read off fan boards and stuff like this because I was really intrigued why they even did this in the first place. And you would think that not even that attempted murder would turn the Undertaker heel, but it didn't. He's been a face ever since for the last 10 years. So I don't know. That was just really weird. The matchup was terrible. The idea that he would kill Paul Bearer was even more dumb than it was in theory. So that was a really weird way of going off the show. And I guess he didn't die because Paul Bearer they would go on to explain that he would return a couple of years later, of course, in 2010, say that he was stretchered out of there, and that was never really made clear on WWE TV, I don't think, but just the whole idea of this contest was just asinine, so a really odd way of going off the show and a really mediocre match in the main event. So overall, definitely one of the worst pay-per-views I've watched in the WWE Network since I got the network back in February. Would not at all suggest watching this show. If I had to tell you one match to go back from the show and watch, definitely would have to be Mysterio versus Chavo. JBL and Eddie had a very good contest for the WWE title. Mysterio and Chavo was great. Everything else was kind of a joke. Like I said, this whole show was kind of focused around the new talent up and coming on the SmackDown brand. And it did succeed in that way with the likes of John Cena. And JBL to an extent, I guess. It kind of made a star with his win over Eddie Guerrero. But Roman Reigns, Suzuki, Mordecai, all of those guys bombed. Tori Wilson and Sable had a terrible women's matchup. The main event with Taker and the Dudleys was horrendous. So why they even closed the show with that was a complete joke. But even so, though, if there's any one matchup I had to suggest that you go out of your way to watch on the show, it would have to be the Cruiserweight Championship matchup, so no doubt about that. Go back and watch Mysterio versus Chavo. Aside from that, don't even bother wasting your time watching this installment of the Great American Bash spend it elsewhere watching another pay-per-view or probably another Great American Bash event on the 4th of July instead. So with all that being said, thanks for watching, guys. Always appreciate it. Make sure to tweet me on Twitter with any suggestions for future pay-per-views you want me to watch and review here on the channel at WrestleRant on Twitter. Facebook is Graham Jason Matthews. YouTube, same thing. And Bleacher Report, same thing. So make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Like I said before, all support is greatly appreciated. Until next week, this is Graham Jason Matthews signing out. Until next week, guys.